Thanks to Coach Mac for setting all this up. Um, really appreciate all the work he's done. Today I'm going to be talking about injury prevention for the overhead athlete. Just a little bit about myself, who I am. I was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, up in Canada, and I currently moved to New Brunswick, which is on the East Coast, to pursue kinesiology, my bachelor's. And while I'm there, I'm working at the Canadian Sports Centre at Atlantic. I'm working under Ken Morrison, who Blakely mentioned there. Outside of strength and conditioning, really like playing or climbing, hiking, anything outdoors. It's really easy when we have the Rockies right in my backyard here. I also play on the volleyball team at UNB. I'm the libero, the short guy, takes a beating from all the taller guys and forgets his jersey on game days, so has to wear the other color. That takes me why I'm doing this presentation. We have a guy named Connor McConnell pictured here, who is an outside hitter for us. He's played on the youth national team for Team Canada, and he pretty much carries our team in every aspect. Anyways, in the first practice that I was at UNB, on the very first 6-on-6 drill, the very first point, my team served it over to his team, came back, and I tried to dig it, hit me square in the face. I dropped, the ball dropped. So why am I doing this presentation? I want to learn everything about preventing shoulder injuries and tell this guy nothing. Don't want to get hit in the face again. All right, so when we're talking about overhead athletes, we're talking quarterbacks, lacrosse, pitchers, tennis, handball, swimming, climbing, bouldering, anything you can think of. And when we're talking about injuries to these guys, of course, they're going to have acute injuries. My buddy Bryden there, the quarterback, he could get tackled, hurt his shoulder, but what we're going to talk about is the chronic instability that is made from repetitive throwing or overhead actions. Just something to keep in mind throughout this presentation. Performance enhancement and injury prevention go hand in hand. Doesn't always have to be one or the other like some people think. A lot of times both of them work together. All right, just to go through the phases of a throw quickly, just to see how much stress is actually put on that shoulder joint. So we begin in the cocking phases where we're going to put so much stress on the anterior muscles. We're in max external rotation. We accelerate through from max external to max internal rotation. And that's just putting a ton of angular velocity onto your shoulder, your elbow, all the smaller joints in your upper extremity there. And then when we get to the follow through, this is where a lot of injuries actually occur, is you're putting tons of strain onto your posterior muscles, trying to slow your arm down. So from a sport coach perspective, there's a study that actually suggested that athletes are 5 times more likely to get injured after pitching for more than 8 months. This is telling us we need an off season. Players can't be playing football in the fall and then in baseball in the spring and taking no breaks from throwing. It's going to lead to injury. 4 times more likely to for an injury to occur after throwing more than 80 times in a game. We'll get into that on the next slide. And this one's more of a strength coach perspective. They're 36 times more likely to get injured after continuing to pitch despite feeling fatigue. So as strength coaches, we're going to try and limit that fatigue as much as possible to avoid injury. So if we look here at what pro athletes are doing compared to amateur throwing athletes, pros are spending a lot more time developing all aspects of good health and good mechanics. They spend a lot of time on the arm care. They do a lot of strength training, and they also work on their mechanics. They have to get throws in. Where if we look at amateurs, they're throwing, they're only working on their mechanics. They're not taking care of their arm. They're not doing strength training. And even if they are, it's not going to be enough to prevent that instability. they all have, or most amateur leagues, they'll have pitch counts that teams have to adhere to. But when most of the injuries occur is after the game, throwing with your parents or friends in the backyard, or going from baseball to your football game. So that's where the strength coach comes over. This is just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We want to maintain and improve your total arc range of motion. So what I'm talking about there is you want to maintain or improve your max external to max internal range of motion. We'll get into that on the next slide. We're also going to be talking about strengthening all the muscles in and around your scapula. And when you're doing that, you're going to want to balance your internal to external strength ratio. Get into that. And of course, we have to have a large focus on core and lower body strength. And we need to put it all together in a periodization scheme that we're not going to over or underwork our athletes. So it all sort of begins with your scapular posture. So important. It's your base for all movement. You need to have good posture to be strong and to be able to move well. I find it easy to think of your thoracic spine and rib cage as sort of train tracks for your scapula. So when you think about train tracks, you want them to be smooth. You want it to be flat. As soon as you get the rounded in shoulders that so many throwing athletes get, rock climbers are super bad for it, your scapula is not going to move as well on it. And when your scapula doesn't move, your range of motion goes down, because when your humerus is trying to flex, like the gentleman in the bottom right there, the scapula is just not moving with it. All right, so humeral retroversion. This is what that is pretty much the ability of your humerus to rotate in your glenohumeral joint. So you need to have this. Lots of people see this picture and think that's bad, but if you're going to throw with any sort of velocity, any sort of power, you need to have lots of external rotation. And that's what humeral retroversion is. That's where the term throw like a girl actually comes from. Humeral retroversion is developed when you're a child and your growth plates are still open. As soon as your growth plates are closed, they can't open up anymore. So traditionally in the past, females would play less sports as children. So they'd get sort of that chicken arm throw that Mr. Barack Obama is doing there. Of course, that's changed. They're playing a lot more sports now. So we have stud athletes like Monet Davis, who can throw, I'm willing to say, harder than anybody on this call. All right, so here's GIRD. What it is an internal rotation deficit. So all the cocking that you do when you're throwing is going to make it possible for you to externally rotate so much more, but that's gonna tighten your posterior capsule and all the muscles in your posterior arm, so that you're not going to be able to internally rotate too far enough. So if we look at the diagram at the bottom there, we want 160 to 180 degrees of total arc motion. That's what's deemed optimal, where the least amount of injuries occur. As long as your dominant and non-dominant arm are within 5 degrees, it shouldn't be a problem. A lot of people like to focus on this solely, and it's just not the way you should be looking at injury prevention. But if you go underneath that 160 to 180 degrees, you're going to have super low amounts of internal rotation. So that's when we get into some stretches that we could do to try and gain some range there. So a couple different ways you could do it. You could do a sleeper stretch, the one that's pictured on the left there. This I'm not a huge fan of. It's just because it stretches your actual joint capsule instead of the muscles. And all you're doing is putting more stress on that capsule, which is what we're going to try and take away. So what I prefer is something like the cross body stretch, like that's pictured at the right here, it is proven actually to increase your internal range of motion more than the sleeper stretch, and it doesn't put the strain on your capsule. It stresses the muscles, which is what we're trying to do. All right. So mobility is great, but strength at the end of the day is probably the main determinant of injury. So in the shoulder, all your muscles are trying to work together to keep that humerus head inside that joint capsule. And if we look at the diagram here, the scapula is half of that joint. So a lot of times I find people, when they're trying to prevent shoulder injuries, they're trying to focus on rotator cuff exercises rather than focus on the scapula. I find if you train the scapula and get it strong enough and durable enough, most of your shoulder problems are going to go away. All right, so when we're doing this, there's a couple big things to consider. One of them being we're trying to balance the internal to external rotation strength ratio. So if you look at my friend Bryden here throwing the football, that's all he does all day is throw footballs. He's only using his internal rotation muscles. He's never using that externally rotated muscles. So your system, the ratio is already out of balance. So we're going to try and follow a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of your posterior or deceleration muscles, just to try and even out some of that strength. When we are doing these workouts too, we need to keep in mind that we should always be training in a 180-degree range of motion. You can see here in the barbell row that you can see that I'm getting my scapulas protracted. I'm keeping a neutral spine, but I'm protracting my scapulas all the way at the bottom and retracting them all the way at the top. We need to do this in all of our exercises, or else we're sort of missing out on the benefits that we can gain for overhead athletes. And at the end of the day, most injuries occur in those maximal ranges. They occur when you're fully cocked back or fully forward. So it would only make sense to train those areas. All right, so some more exercise examples here. You can do a scap push-up or pull-up. Those are big in the climbing community. Everyone's doing those just because it's so healthy for your scapulas. Another one, face pull. Make sure you're getting the full 180-degree range of motion there. All right, this is the lower trap, probably the most commonly missed muscle when training. Not on purpose, but just because the other muscles around it are just so much more dominant than it, and it can lead to some serious scapula problems. This is because it's a prime mover of the scapula for retraction and depression. So you need this to fire. So yeah, we need to correct the movement patterns to be able to get this to actually fire properly. So to do that, we're going to be training the neurological pathways. We're going to be doing a lower trap banded Y. You can do this on the ground too. All you're doing, it's a short range of motion, just from here to here. You're trying to get all the way back with using your lower traps. A lot of times, if you're going to be doing this, a lot of athletes will raise their shoulders up and get their upper traps or delts engaged. It's not the point. That's what their body's used to. So we need to train away from that to actually get the right muscles moving for the right actions. All right, here's core and leg strength. It seems pretty elementary to all of us, but we'll go over the path of energy transfer. Of course, all force and energy comes from the ground, up through the legs, through the pelvis. It's harnessed by the core, and then it finally gets into the upper extremity. So when we think about that, we need to train these to prevent injury to the upper extremity. If you have weak legs and you're trying to throw hard, all your force you're going to be trying to use your shoulder to produce that force, and that's going to lead to injury. As well, if you have a poor core, your mechanics are going to be way out of whack. when you throw, you want your body to sort of look like a corkscrew. Your legs turning first, your hips following, and then the rest of you turning all as one. When you don't have a strong core, your hips and shoulders can't work independently from each other, and it's going to be super awkward, and you're going to put way more strain than necessary onto your shoulder again. So this is why the deadlift is my favorite exercise for overhead athletes, just because you're getting all the benefits of leg, strength and power. You're getting the core benefits. You have to keep a braced core the whole time. And you're getting scapular retraction, or you should be, throughout the whole lift. If you're retracting your scaps throughout the deadlift, you're going to see some massive improvement with your overhead athletes. And this is the only one of a few exercises that I can think of that you can really load up your scaps and get them to retract under super high loads, which is the stress that you need to get better. All right, periodization, all the strength coaches' favorite thing. It's pretty similar to regular periodization. In the off season, you're trying to prepare your athletes, build strength, power, endurance. You don't want them to be fatigued going into the season or weak. And in season, you're just trying to maintain that. You're still going to be working at a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of your decelerating or posterior muscles, but you need to sort of adjust to your season workload that you're going to be seeing. Quick recap, nothing's guaranteed. We're just trying to minimize risk. If a shoulder program is saying guaranteed no injury, they're probably lying to you. There has to be an off season for your athletes. They can't constantly be throwing, or else they're gonna get injured. And you have to work on stabilizing and strengthening your scapula, your shoulder, your legs, your core. Everything works together with this. You really have to focus on that. All right, guys, thanks for listening. Feel free to send me any questions that you have. There's my email. Send me a DM on Instagram. And yeah, if you guys have learned anything from this presentation, I'd love to hear it. But if I ask anything of you guys, it's just don't tell Connor McConnell here. I don't want another face injury. All right, thanks for listening, guys.